To each and every one of you this morning, Madam CEO, Mr. President, and members of the TTCSI executive. Welcome to our panelists and of course to everyone else who has taken time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning. My name is Alvin Morton. I am recently appointed director for TTCSI, and it is my pleasure and privilege to open this morning's session on strengthening procurement within the services sector. I shall be your moderator for today's session, and we would like to commence with a prayer that has been submitted or volunteered by the credit union. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. We thank the credit union for submitting this prayer. And before we get going, I shall invite our CEO, Vashti Gayadeen, to give us some remarks. Madam CEO.
Mr. Morton, the Vice President of the TTCSI will speak on behalf of both organizations.
Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Mr. Munina Lalchan, Procurement Regulator, and other officials of the Office of Procurement Regulation. Mr. Mark Edgell, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Coalition of Services Industries, and other directors of the TTCSI. Directors and other officials of the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago. Ms. Vashti Gayadeen, CEO, TTCSI, distinguished members of the Cooperative Credit Union League and the TTCSI, stakeholders, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on the timely topic, strengthening procurement within the services sector, hosted by the Trinidad and Tobago Coalition of Services Industries and our organization, the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago. This is a part of our league's 75th anniversary celebrations being recognized this year, and we are happy to have our umbrella body, the TTCSI, support us in this manner. Our organizations are thankful to the team at the Office of Procurement Regulation, who graciously accepted our invitation to collaborate with us in the hosting of this webinar, and particularly to serve as facilitator today. As the representative bodies of our 688,000 service provider firms and individuals in Trinidad and Tobago, the TTCSI and our league recognize the need to inform our members of the impact of the proposed procurement regulation on the services sector, steps required to ensure compliance, and also continued business development. A transparent and enlightened procurement regime is vital to the development of any country that wishes to engage the best providers of goods and services and have a thriving society. Governments, therefore, must at all times be mindful of their fiduciary responsibility to the citizens of the country which they govern, and the trust and confidence that the people place in their leadership to ensure that strong governance standards, leadership, and other forms of due diligence in every aspect of the running of the affairs of the country are in place, more specifically from the standpoint of procurement. In Trinidad and Tobago, the public procurement and disposal of public property legislation, long promised, must be fully proclaimed and operationalized to restore public faith in the procurement process and how public funds are utilized. We are optimistic that this can be completed in this fiscal year. Despite the fact that we are concerned with recent pronouncement made by our Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs when he addressed the Cabinet recently on the issue of the readiness of the procurement legislation, and I will quote, "Recent reviews clearly indicate that we are not there yet, and that more work and consultation are required if a workable piece of legislation is to be the anticipated outcome." End of quote. Such a statement must be of concern when one considers that the Act of 2015 has already been amended 3 times in 2016, 17, and 2020. It therefore leaves us to wonder about how soon we are likely to see the heightened level of accountability, transparency, integrity, and value for money for which we have been searching. But let me, as I prepare to close, on behalf of the TTCSI and the Cooperative Credit Union League, extend commendation to Mr. Munila Lanchan and his team at the Office of Procurement Regulation for the yeoman service that they have been doing to move the process forward with the aim of ensuring that our country is ready for the operationalization of this critical piece of procurement legislation. We now look forward to the presentation from the team of the Regulator's Office, as we believe that this will edify us about the impact of the legislation on our service providers, who are in large part the lifeblood of our economy. The TTCSI and the Cooperative Credit Union League remains committed to working with our members and all our stakeholders in the best interest of the services sector and, of course, Trinidad and Tobago, as we seek to strengthen procurement standards. We now invite each of you to fully participate in this webinar. Members, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you and I welcome you once again.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President, for your opening remarks. Let us get in now to the business of the webinar, strengthening procurement within the services sector. And to do that and to lead us through that process will be Mr. Munilal Lalchan. Mr. Lalchan is the chairman and procurement regulator of the Procurement Board of Trinidad and Tobago. In the past, he has served on the Board of Governors and was also chairman of the Audit Committee of the National Energy Skills Center, as well as chairman of the Board of Directors of Invest TT Limited, as well as of the Education Facilities Company Limited. No stranger to directorship in a number of prestigious firms, Munilal is a former director and vice president, finance and planning at the Atlantic LNG Company of Trinidad and Tobago, a former director of several RBC financial institutions and the Hotel Facilitation Company Limited. With charitable work always close to his heart, Mr. Lalchan was a director of the Heroes Foundation and several other charitable organizations, in addition to being a past president of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Holding an EMBA from Auburn University, Alabama, USA, and the Advanced Management Program, AMP 165 of Harvard Business School, Mr. Lalchan is a member of the Institute of the Chartered Accountants of Trinidad and Tobago and served on its council, in addition to previously holding the position of chairman of the Investigation Committee. As a fellow of the Chartered Association of Certified Accountants of the UK, he has spoken in conferences in oil and gas, as well as financing in the USA, the UK, and the Middle East. Despite his vast professional repertoire, Munilal is a committed family man who occasionally enjoys music, golf, football, and cricket. Please join me in warmly welcoming to the virtual spotlight our procurement regulator, Mr. Munilal Lalchan.
Thank you very much for that very nice welcome. And if you can just give me the thumbs up that you are hearing me clearly. Great stuff. And let me say a special welcome to members of the Credit Union League and the Trinidad and Tobago Coalition of Service Industry for all your support that you have been giving us over the years in terms of getting the legislation and regulations assented to and proclaimed. Special, if you would allow me, a special welcome to one of my past board members, Lara Quentrell Thomas. It's really nice to have her. And if there are any hard questions that you ask me, I can't answer, I'll pass it on to Lara. So really, it's a privilege to share with you all this morning. And we'll go straight into the presentation. You will not see me for this section. I'll keep my camera off, but certainly for the question and answer session, if you wish, we can switch on the camera at that stage. I know you have a lot of questions that you'll want to pose, but this is really going to be very beneficial to your members, especially in the SME sector and the service industry, because it changes the dynamics and how we deal with procurement across public bodies, and how these service industries and members of the Credit Union League will be able to participate in public procurement moving forward. So we'll get started with the presentation now. It will be a three-part presentation. Myself, Marissa, and Joy will participate in the various segments of the presentation, but I'll kick it off. I'm normally the opening batsman.
Saving our world. It's a topic that we've heard much talk about in recent years as climate change continues to cause many countries to take stock of their contribution to this global crisis. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, the Office of Procurement Regulation is committed to doing all that we can to ensure that our public bodies keep their demands on global natural resources to a minimum. But in an age so heavily driven by consumerism, the drive to reducing our eco-footprint needs to be championed at all levels, including procurement. Procurement is a business's process of acquiring goods and services. It involves identifying needs, sourcing suppliers, negotiating terms, finalizing the purchase, and keeping proper records. The Office of Procurement Regulation, or OPR, is an independent body established under the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015. The legislation encourages public bodies to incorporate sustainable procurement practices that will help them to manage our waste products using sustainable disposal practices, ensure ethical and responsible treatment of staff and communities, build and manage our sustainable production capacity through education, training, environmental management systems, monitoring and reporting. So what changes can you make? Well, start with just one. Sustainable procurement is our collective decision to choose energy-efficient equipment and appliances, eco-friendly products with less packaging, ethically produced and certified fair trade products, equal tender opportunities for local and small suppliers. One change in your procurement, one new responsible action today can make a huge impact for sustainable results. Yes, it may require a little more research and planning, but incorporating sustainable procurement practices will protect our public purse as we make more effective and efficient use of human, natural, and financial resources. And as the demand increases, producers will produce more products that are environmentally friendly, resource efficient, and safe for all. To find out more about how you could devise and implement innovative practices in sustainable procurement, visit the resources section of our website, oprtt.org.
So the question is, why all the hype in terms of the procurement legislation, regulations, and so on? And what has taken place over the last couple of days? Really, how does this affect the country? And by way of setting the context for discussion this morning, I'd like to refer to three things that would have happened over the years. And one was a study done by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, where they did their foreign bribery report in 2014. And one of the things coming out of that report is that they have confirmed that public procurement is one of the government's activities most vulnerable to corruption. And in their study, they discovered that 2/3 of foreign bribery cases occurred in sectors that are closely associated with contracts or licensing through public procurement. And if done correctly, you can save between 10 and 30% of the investment in these public funded construction projects and so on. And you can save that where you have proper management, so you can eliminate corruption. And what we did is just to do a quick back of the envelope calculation. Of course, this has got me into some hot waters and so on, but I still use it because I think it's very relevant. If we take a budget in this country of $26 billion, which is half of the national budget, 26 billion being the amount that we estimate is spent on procurement activities, and we were to save 20% of that, that's between the 10 and 30%. We can save literally on an annual basis about $5.2 billion. Think about what that can do. Every 5 years, we can fund the budget for procurement free of charge. Hospitals, roads, schools, additional $5.2 billion into the service sector to run different areas of our economy. Just think about that as a data point. If you can give us 1 minute, we need to just come out of the presentation and go back in. Let's go ahead. I'm assuming now that that block that the participant would have been seeing has gone away. If not, we'll continue with the presentation. The second data point we'll want to look at is a study that was done by the European Commission. And they estimated that approximately euro $120 billion are lost each year. Now, you know, we beat up with ourselves and we say we're so corrupt and so on. That may be so. But even in the European Commission, where you have these countries that are scoring very high in the corruption perception index, they lose 120 billion each year just due to corruption. And this suggests that you can save between 20 and 25% in terms of public contracts. And if you look at the slide on the right-hand side, that pie chart, you would see that approximately half of that could be saved if you have proper management of the procurement function. So again, significant leakages in the European countries. And then finally, the third data point I would like to look at is something that was said by our Honorable Prime Minister in an address to the public sector leadership team, January of this year. He indicated that once the public sector becomes digitized, corruption will be much easier, which is alluding to the fact that we do have corruption in the public sector. And he stated that this would be an assault on white-collar crime and criminal conduct, which currently flourishes with impunity, but which will wither if access is digitally controlled and recorded, and information in the form of evidence identified who did what, where, when, how, and under what authority. And all that is really catered for properly under the procurement legislation and regulation. So those are the three data points I wanted to bring to your attention this morning. And then when we look at the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, this was passed as Act number 1 of 2015. And it is an act to provide for public procurement and for the retention and disposal of public property in accordance with the principles of good governance, namely accountability, transparency, integrity, and value for money. And you will see that in the preamble to the act. And the office actually was established under the act. And the first board was appointed in 2018 to give effect to operationalize the act. We are a regulatory body governed by an independent board, which is very important. And you would see a lot of information out in the public domain about castigating the independence of the board and so on. But that's all par for the course. The board was appointed by the president after consultation with the prime minister and the leader of the opposition on January 12th of 2018. We get our independence in section 13(2)(b) of the act, and it states that we shall not be subject to the direction or control of any other person or authority in the performance of our function, but we shall be accountable to Parliament. In fact, our report goes directly to the Speaker of the House. So who are the public bodies that fall under the act and have to be part of the reporting structures? It is the office of the president, and that's the president of the country. Even though we report to Parliament, Parliament is subject to the act and all procurement and disposal activities. The judiciary, including coming down from the Chief Justice right on to the Magistrate Court, Court of Appeal, and anybody in that line, they are responsible also for public procurement, and they are reportable to the office. A ministry or department, a division of a ministry, the Tobago House of Assembly or a division of the Tobago House of Assembly, a municipal corporation, a regional health authority, statutory body, state control enterprise, service commission established under the Constitution or other written law. And important, a body corporate or unincorporated entity using public money. And when we look at the definition for public money, which links to that last bucket there, it says it's money received or receivable by a public body. So all these grants that is received or receivable by public bodies from the different agencies coming through, it is money received or receivable by a public body, raised by an instrument from which it can be reasonably inferred that the state accepts ultimate liability in the case of default. That is in the case of raising bonds and so on for special projects. That's public money. Spent or committed for future expenditure by a public body, or distributed by a public body to a person. All these distributions that take place with the sporting organization and different NGOs by public bodies to these NGOs and sporting organization, that's public money. And raised in accordance with a written law for a public purpose or appropriated by Parliament. So you can see that the net is wide in terms of who is a public body and has to fall under Section 4 of the Act. The objects of the Act, we would have gone through the first four, which is accountability, integrity, transparency, and value for money, which is really found in the preamble to the Act. But the principles under Section 5 goes on to speak to efficiency, fairness, equity, public confidence, local industry development, sustainable procurement, and sustainable development. And you would have seen our little advertisement in terms of sustainable procurement at the beginning. So it goes wide and wider than those four in the preamble. Under Section 13, it tells us what the OPR is all about. These are the functions under the remit of the OPR under Section 13. It's to establish a comprehensive database of information on public procurement and tenders received, award, and values of contracts. So in other words, you know, previously it was difficult to get any information at all in terms of tenders awarded, contracts awarded, to whom it was awarded, and the value of those awards and so on. But now it is required on a regular basis, at least quarterly, that public bodies actually post on our website all the contracts awarded, to whom it was awarded, the value of the award, any variation orders, and any litigation matters associated therewith. And therefore, that is something that you would see coming out once we have full proclamation. So it's a total open data system. To set training standards, competency levels, and certification requirements. Now, this is important. We are not to actually get involved in training, which we have been doing in a significant manner. So far, we have held, and may I say, this is our 301st public appearance in terms of opportunities for sensitization. So you are the 301st. We have just completed 300 last week. So we have already set those training standards and the levels and so on. And you can get that on our website. We have done that in consultation with the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago, and we have rolled out that to all public bodies and suppliers and contractors to issue and review guidelines in relation to public procurement and the retention and disposal of public property. So far, and we'll come to that shortly, we have issued 43 handbooks and guidelines to guide public bodies in terms of practices, and we have rolled out several of those, and you can get those on our website in terms of video presentation and recordings. To prepare and update, issue model handbooks incorporating standardized bidding documents. You know, as many as you have public bodies, you have different practices, procedural forms, and documents. So we have standardized those and published those as part of our handbooks and guidelines. You can also find those on our website. If you don't want, and I would want to say that the handbooks and guidelines that we have issued, that part of the Act has been proclaimed. So we are authorized to issue those handbooks and guidelines. And therefore, public bodies could use them because that was part of what was issued in terms of partial proclamation in 2015 July. If public bodies do not wish to use our handbooks and guidelines, they can prepare their own handbooks and guidelines, but it must come to the office for our approval before they start to use those. I would also want to say that a number of ministries and public bodies have already accepted our handbooks and guidelines and have confirmed in writing to us that they will be adopting those as they move forward. Of course, with the age of technology, we have to promote the use of technology, not to institute e-procurement system, but to promote it. We are working together with a number of agencies to get that going, to provide best practice advice in the conduct of procurement activities. And this is including promotion of electronic transactions like reverse auctions and so on, to harmonize policy systems and practices in relation to public procurement activities. I'll give you for example here, on disposal of public property. We have about 14 regional corporations in Trinidad and Tobago, and THA in Tobago. And as many as you have these 14 regional corporations, you have different practices taking place. So we have harmonized those now into one regional corporation handbook and guideline to review the procurement practices and delivery system on an annual basis. This is about continuous improvement, and we continue to monitor what's happening in the local environment and internationally so that we can give guidance to the public bodies, suppliers, and contractors in terms of best practices to determine, develop, introduce, maintain, and update relevant system-wide database and technology. So, for example, one of the database we have to maintain is the database of pre-qualified contractors and suppliers. Moving forward, once we have full proclamation, and I would also want to say that, and I'll give you an invitation as suppliers and contractors, you can come onto our website, our depository, and start your registration process to be pre-qualified. Because once the Act is fully proclaimed, there would only be one database of pre-qualified suppliers and contractors that can be used by public bodies. So no longer a public body is going to have their own databases for suppliers and contractors. And you would have seen, if you have been invited by the Water and Sewerage Authority to come on our website to be registered. It is mandatory that you be registered on the website. Otherwise, you would not be able to benefit from suppliers, contracts and tenders being awarded by public bodies. And you can see the wide amount of public bodies that will be issuing tenders. So you must be registered on our website, and it's mandatory under regulations that the public body only use suppliers and contractors from that database. And to promote the awareness of public bodies like we have been doing in the past since 2018, and we continue to do those. We are and continue to do a significant amount of research and surveys with respect to public procurement and disposal. We would have issued a readiness assessment, and you would have heard a lot about this readiness assessment. The readiness assessment was sent to 314 public bodies to find out how ready they are to give effect to the procurement legislation. And of course, only 70 responded. And this is in the public domain now. And the rest just ignored our requests. And we are where we are today because of public bodies refusing to get ready and take our cue that you need to get ready using the readiness assessment tools. And even though we have sent out reminders, we still have a very low uptake. Those who are way ahead are part of the 70 that would have followed our requests and taking the necessary steps. We do have some significant amount of movement, for example, like in Water and Sewerage Authority, Tech, Heritage Petroleum, NGC, just to name the big ones. They have actually taken advantage and move ahead with implementing the Act in its form that could benefit them. To create, and so you would see something in red here. And when we took up office, we found that this was a direct conflict of our roles and responsibility. And we asked for this to be removed from under our purview because we thought to dispose of state lands and so on, and then come back and to audit and investigate the same disposal would have been a conflict of interest. So another public body will be charged with that responsibility. To create and publish standard contracts, we have also issued those. To prepare and maintain the database of pre-qualified contractors, I would have mentioned that before, so you can come onto our website and be pre-qualified as soon as we close the session. To prepare and maintain a list of pre-qualified mediators, arbitrators, and experts for purpose of alternate dispute resolution. This is important because you will also see in the public domain that there will be a plethora of litigations and so on. Now, the Act actually speaks to having some of these things resolved through the office, through the review board, through mediation, arbitration, and any other type of alternate dispute resolution before it ends up in court. So there are avenues to deal with these things to mitigate against the enormous amount of legal fees that people pay to get to the courts and so on, and to provide advice on best practice on the aggregation of procurement of disposal in terms of value for money. Now, you would recognize that we put down very expensive government buildings, and some of these are left to languish and run to failure. We buy expensive pieces of equipment in the medical field, and they suddenly break down because we don't have contracts associated with maintenance. And those are things now that are required, and it's included under the regulations to make sure that we keep these buildings and equipment fit for purpose. We also have wide-ranging audit, review, and also investigative powers to investigate. You would also see that we can seize documents and so on, but that only happens after we have approached the courts, and the courts give us the authority to go into the public bodies and get the necessary documents and so on. We do have a full team of auditors and investigators online, ready to go. So what are some of the roles and responsibilities of directors and boards? I will just go through this very quickly because some of you all may or may not wish to take this. So when we do share the presentation with you, you can go through this in a lot of detail. So what we have done is to look at the role of the directors. And this is from the point of view of the directors are responsible really for exercising and discharging their duties in an honest and good faith. And they should not be getting involved as public bodies directors in the procurement function, except as it relates to delegation of authority. And this is clearly stated in the SEMP manual that they are to direct the management of the business and the affairs of the company, and they must not usurp the responsibility of executive management by involving themselves in the day-to-day management issues. And we see procurement as a day-to-day management issues, and they should not get involved in those issues. And of course, that the policies and procedures and business decisions are taken at the board level, that they are implemented. And of course, they should further ensure, and this is in red, that the company is staffed with competent senior management personnel, because procurement is not just about buying and disposing activities. There is a whole set of things that you need to do in preparation for procurement. So you must have the staff properly trained and competent to manage your procurement function. That's where you get the real benefit of procurement activities. And then we looked at the financial regulations in the Exchequer and Audit Act, and they actually tells us that the person that is responsible for the discharge of the financial duties and so on is the accounting officer and the equivalent of accounting officers in the state sector. So this is where the accounting officer will be responsible for the financial affairs and the budget that has been approved by Parliament to make sure that it's safeguarded. This continues even though the accounting officers redelegate some of their responsibilities. They are ultimately responsible for the direction of control and responsible to the Attorney General to make sure they give accountability for their stewardship. Now, under Section 61(2) of the Act, all public bodies shall have a procurement officer who shall be responsible for public procurement and the disposal of public property. And I want to link this back to what I just mentioned. The responsibility for public procurement and disposal of public property lies with that named procurement officer. And that person must be notified to us in writing. However, the reference in the Act to the commission of an offense by a public body, and this is the commission of the offense by the public body, there are other offenses that could be committed by individuals, shall be construed as a reference to the commission of the offense by the procurement officer or an officer who purports to act in such a capacity. So if a board member or any other officer decides that they want to usurp the authority of the procurement officer and take on that responsibility, and the offense was committed with their direct consent or connivance, or he or she with knowledge did not exercise reasonable diligence to prevent the commission of the offense, they will be held responsible under the Act and charged for the commission of that offense. Previously, there were a number of public bodies, especially state-controlled enterprises, who had these subcommittees called tender subcommittee, who got involved in the tendering and contract management. And now what is going to happen is that introduced for the first time under regulations is the establishment of what we refer to as a PDAC, a Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee. It's an advisory committee, not a committee to approve suppliers, contracts, and disposal activities. So this committee is established under regulations, and you will see that under procurement methods and procedures. The composition of that committee should be of senior personnel within the organization, corporate secretary or head of department of the legal department, head of finance, and a subject matter expert at a minimum, and any such member as may be necessary. If you don't have the capacity within the public bodies, you can source that from another public body which is willing to let those persons deal with those activities in another public body. So you can actually source it from another ministry, another state-controlled enterprise, and so on. And of course, you would have to appoint a secretary who shall not have voting rights, really. And that person will take copious notes in terms of the meetings and so on. The committee is responsible for reviewing the reports, recommendations for contracts award and procurement proceedings and property disposal to make sure it's in adherence to the Act and regulations, handbooks and guidelines, approved procurement and disposal strategy, and to make sure you achieve the objects of the Act under Section 5 that you went through previously. And where the committee is of the opinion that there is not adherence or achievement as set out in the sub-regulations, they shall recommend the appropriate action to the procurement officer with a written explanation providing reasons for its decision. It's very important to put things in writing in the case of investigation, and you'll see why coming up shortly. And the committee shall cause the written explanation to be forwarded to the accounting officers for noting. Where there is an agreement, the committee shall give the accounting officer a written recommendation which must be accompanied by the procurement proceeding file and property disposal file. If, however, there is a conflict and a member of that committee is conflicted, they must disclose that interest and not take part in the proceedings. Of course, the areas of conflicts could be that they are a member, a director, or shareholder of the company doing business or making the tender, is a proprietor of the firm or a partner in the firm, is employed by or otherwise is a party to the contract for services, has a financial interest in or relationship with someone who has a financial interest in that company or organization, is a relative of an individual being reviewed by the committee. That's in the case of the firm, and there is a relative there. So what we have done is to put together a little diagram that pulls all this together. So I mentioned on the left-hand side, you have the disposal committee, and on the right-hand side, you have the procurement evaluation committee. They all work together with the named procurement officer. They come up with the recommendation after they do their due diligence and so on. That recommendation goes down to the PDAC. The PDAC then makes the recommendation to the accounting officer. And on the left-hand side, in the disposal, the accounting officer could accept it or reject it. If the accounting officer accepts it, then you dispose. If they reject it, they can have an appeal to the line minister, and between the accounting officer and the line minister decide how best to dispose of the item, but that must be in writing back to the accounting officer and the named procurement officer, and notified to the OPR as to why there was a different course of action. Of course, if the board of directors wants to be involved and be notified of those activities, they can so be notified on both sides. And on the procurement side, if you accept, you go ahead and procure. If you reject, you don't have recourse back to any line minister. You have to go back up through the steps and get the rectification that you require. Of course, there might be some high profile, high value, high risk activity that the board wants to be aware of. You can so notify them for a no objection. And in the case of financial delegation, to sign off on amounts past the accounting officer's delegated authority. Under section 6.1, very important, any procurement of goods, works, or services, or retention or disposal of public property that is not done in accordance with the Act, and any procurement contract or agreement that is not entered in accordance with the Act shall be void and illegal. Of course, we would not make things void and illegal at the office unless due process is followed. And we will take the necessary steps and act expeditiously and take those steps that we think fit in order to minimize any negative economic impact. And we have set up our procedures as to how we will go about doing this in terms of the requirements for the office and its officers. Now, for the first time, all procurement entity shall, no later than 6 weeks after the approval of the national budget, they have to now publish on their website or other electronic format information regarding all, and the key word there is all, procurement activities for the following 12 months. So this is becoming now a public document where you are required to send that information in the public domain and to update the information if there are significant changes during the year as necessary. If any member of the public require a copy of that, you are obligated, of course, with the charging of a small fee to reproduce the information, but you have to give the information to any member of the public who requests such information. If it's not available and or the public body refuses to publish that, they can make a request to the office, the public member, and we shall conduct an investigation and take the necessary step that we think is fit to ensure that you comply at a public body with the request. So I mentioned the database of suppliers and contractors. It is accessible to the public. All information provided, so if your membership provides that information, you are responsible for ensuring the accuracy under section 26.3. However, public bodies under section 29.1e is also responsible during an active tender. If they require you to confirm the information provided, they can also ask you to do that under 26.4 of the Act. So you go in, you put in your information, you get pre-qualified, you have an active tender and the public body thinks that the information is probably dated, which it should not be, or they require further information, they can request that under the relevant sections. So pre-qualification is the procedure to identify prior to solicitation all the suppliers and contractors who qualified, and you do that through the database. And if you have an abnormally large amount of suppliers and contractors in the database and you want to whittle down the amount, you can do a pre-selection based on predetermined criteria to select. Let's say you have 100 persons doing electrical, you want to pre-select. You can zero down to the best 10, but you must state clearly what are the requirements of pre-selecting those 10. Of course, if you want to get more information, you could go to our pre-qualification and pre-selection and download that guidelines to get more information. And our depository can be accessed via the website there, depository.oprtt.org, where you can go and get pre-qualified. Now, I think most of you now will be more interested with these slides. So in pre-qualifying the suppliers and contractors, the public body and entity must ensure the following things take place. The supplier and contractor has the legal capacity to enter into the procurement contract. They are not insolvent, in receivership, bankrupt, or being wound up. Their affairs are not being administered by a court or judicial officer. Their business activities have not been suspended, and they are not the subject of legal proceedings for any of the foregoing. When we took office, there was C, you see it in red there, have not, and their directors or officers have not been convicted of any criminal offense. When we looked at that, we thought it was going to be disadvantage to a number of persons who have been charged for various offenses that probably a small criminal offense. And we thought that that would have really sidelined a number of individuals. And if we are to encourage restorative justice, we should not have had that clause. So we approached the government and they have amended that. So the amendment is in blue. Have not been convicted within the past 10 years of corruption or fraud-related offenses locally or internationally, as individuals or as directors or officers of a company. So that's the change now. They must have fulfilled their obligations to pay all required taxes and contributions in Trinidad. So if you cannot demonstrate that you have paid all your required taxes, you will not be pre-qualified. Have the necessary professional and technical qualification and competencies. Let me say also under D, contributions include NIS and so on. So that $1 billion that the Minister of Finance mentioned leaks out of the system. If you collect NIS and you fail to, you would not be pre-qualified. If you ought to collect and you fail to, you would not be pre-qualified. You have to demonstrate that you have fulfilled those requirements. Have the necessary professional and technical qualification and competencies, financial resources, equipment, etc., etc. Meet all relevant industry standards. For example, if you are involved in, let's say, Boken and PPGPL, which is a public company, you have to demonstrate that you have the necessary safety, store certification, HSSE policies, procedures, and so on, and upload all those on the website when you enter into the depository. And of course, all the requirements shall apply equally to all suppliers and contractors. There will be no blight. For the first time also in legislation and explained in regulation is the issue of standstill period. So when you go out now for tender, especially for the high risk, high value contracts, you have to state that there will be a standstill period. And that standstill period will be between 10 and 15 days. So how it works is that you must state the standstill period, and it allows, again, an avenue for a review of the process. So once you have completed the process and you are about to award the contract, you have gone through evaluation, etc., gotten approval internally, and you are about to award a contract to contractor A at price B. You must now notify all the participants in that particular tender that day zero of the standstill period has started, and you will be awarding the contract to contractor A at price B. So you say that up front. Give the suppliers and contractors an opportunity to ask for a review. Once they ask for a review and you have given them the information and there is no further request for review, then you go ahead and award on day 10 or day 15 or between, depending on the standstill period. If, however, they are not satisfied with the review that you would have given them, they can then ask for a review by the office. And in that case, there will be a hold on the award of the contract until the process for a challenge has been completed. So that's important. But once that process is completed and you award, there is no further review for challenge. So the supplier or contractor can bring a challenge proceeding where it is alleged that the procuring entity made a decision or took an action that is not in compliance with the act, and the supplier contractor has suffered or is likely to suffer loss or injury because of that decision. Now, the challenge proceedings is restricted, so it's not every procurement activity is subject to challenge. There is no challenge in terms of disposal of public property. And in the case of the challenge as it relates to procurement, here are the 3 different areas that you could challenge. You can make an application for review on the terms of solicitation, pre-qualification, or pre-selection. All these take place before you even award or receive bids. So that's the first one. No contract awarded, no stopping. This is just about solicitation, pre-qualification, or pre-selection. Number 1. Where you have the entity is within the standstill period, you can make a challenge, as I just mentioned. Where there is no standstill period, within 7 working days after the publication of the notice of the decision or action that is taken in accordance with this act. So those are the 3 conditions. So it's not wide as is being speculated in the public domain that there will be a plethora of issues that we have to deal with. It's very restricted. Within 3 days of receiving that application, we will publish it in 2 daily newspapers in circulation in Trinidad. So it's a public document. All challenge will be held in public. And then within 3 days of the receipt of the application for review, we could order the suspension of the procurement proceedings at any time before the entry into force of a procurement contract, before the entry into force, or order the suspension of a performance of a procurement contract or operation of a framework agreement that has been entered into force if and for as long as we find that such a suspension is necessary to protect the interests of the applicant. And we do have, I must say here that we do have our employees and board members properly trained, and we were trained by 7 judges of the judiciary and 3 judges of the Caribbean Court of Justice to make sure that we do proper procedures. There is also process now in place to make what we call an ineligibility list of suppliers and contractors. So if the suppliers and contractors misbehave, they consistently fail to provide satisfactory performance, they can be debarred from doing business with public bodies for a period of up to 10 years. If you are found to be indulging in corrupt or fraudulent practices, you will be debarred from doing business for 10 years. Or if you are convicted of an offense under the act, you will be debarred from doing business for 10 years. And you will be debarred as the registered company and directors and officers named upon registration. And of course, the supplier contractor includes any person who is a director, manager, senior officer, partner, or a similar officer, or any person. So if you are debarred as an individual, as a company, and as a director, and you try to come and re-register on that different heading or different name, and that is found out, that other organization will also be debarred from doing business with the public bodies. So there are a number of specific act on public bodies. Of course, you have to have your named procurement officers under section 61(2). You have to establish a disposal committee. And I would have gone through the establishment of the disposal and an advisory committee. You have to develop your annual procurement plans, and we would have gone through that. You have to publish it within the 6 weeks. You have to get your handbooks and guidelines approved, and these are all for public bodies. You are now responsible previously for things that would have been under the Central Tenders Board. That's the first bullet point if you have seen it hidden. You are now responsible for that activity. So no longer you have a Central Tenders Board to actually depend on in your procurement and disposal activities. So Central Tenders Board goes away. So all these large contracts that CTB used to actually procure on the public body's behalf, that is being done now by the public body. So that's where it is important that the public body has the correct level of experience and qualified staff to deal with procurement activities, these huge multi-million-dollar contracts. So that's important. And of course, the last point there, you must implement the necessary internal control framework to make sure that you have things like segregation of duties and so on intact. So these are some of the fines and penalties and so on that are associated with infringements. If you fail to comply with the direction of the OPR, just a fine of $100,000. Failure of a member of the board of the OPR or the committee established under section 16 of the Act to disclose an interest during hearings and so on, $500,000 and 1 year imprisonment. If you split contract, $500,000 and 1 year. All these are jointed is a fine and a jail sentence. Failure of procuring entities to comply with requirement with respect to confidentiality of information, $500,000 1 year. If you victimize persons for reporting activities, same thing. Failure of a person to report instances of collusion, if you're aware of it and it's found out after, same thing. You make a false report to the office, same thing. Concealing or destroying information required for an investigation. You would have heard me emphasize on keeping copious notes. You also keep it in more than one file. Electronic is also acceptable. Failure to produce that information is $5 million and 10 years in prison. Failure to comply with requirement with respect to confidentiality during a challenge proceedings, $500,000 1 year. Conduct influencing public officers in the case of bribery, conflict of interest, corrupt, fraudulent, collusive, coercive, or obstructive practices, 1 million and 5 years in prison. Bid rigging to influence the procurement proceedings, $5 million and 10 years in prison. Altering a procurement document to influence the outcome of the procurement proceedings, 2 million and 7 years in prison. And if you contravene any regulations that was made earlier this year by the minister on the recommendation of the OPR, up to $1 million and 5 years imprisonment. And I don't have to explain that little fancy stuff underneath there. Money plus jail term leads to tears. So be aware. So what I would suggest we do, we have been going for a little while, just to make sure you take a 5 minutes and kind of stretch, get a cup of coffee, take a bathroom break, and we'll be back in exactly 5 minutes from now to proceed with Marissa on procurement methods and procedures. 5 minutes starts about now. So I'd like to introduce now Marissa De La Rosa, who is our Head of Capacity Development, and she will take us through the procurement methods and procedures.
So good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Lalchan. Good morning to all attendees of today's session. And a special thank you for the very warm welcome by the host. So I will take you through procurement methods and procedures, the evaluation process, procurement of consultants, and the record of procurement proceedings. So essentially, when we speak of procurement methods, we are referring to the procedures through which a procuring entity, be it public or private, purchases services, goods, or works. So some procurement methods are considered competitive, whilst others are considered non-competitive. So Regulation 5 of the Procurement Methods and Procedures Regulations of 2021 states that, and I'm quoting, a public body shall utilize open bidding unless the complexity of the procurement or market conditions renders another method more appropriate for achieving best value for money. So we see that open bidding is a default competitive public procurement method under the Act for acquiring goods, works, or services by public bodies. And this is basically because open bidding exists where there are multiple suppliers available to fulfill a requirement, and they're willing to vie for a public body's business. So where strong competitive factors exist in the market, your negotiating position is stronger, and there are greater opportunities for you for gaining concessions in terms of price, be it payment terms, services, and after-sales support, and the like. So codified in Regulation 7 of the Procurement Methods and Procedures, some fundamental requirements of open bidding are as follows. It must be open to all qualified and interesting bidders. It is advertised either locally or internationally or regionally where required. It must have objective qualifications criteria. It must have neutral and clear technical specifications. And it must have clear and objective evaluation criteria. So limited bidding. Basically, limited bidding is a procurement method that limits the requests for tenders to select numbers of suppliers or contractors. Regulation 8 outlines the requirements for a public body engaging in limited tendering. And Regulation 8 states, a procuring entity may engage in limited bidding to restrict the number of suppliers or contractors who are invited to make a submission where the subject of the procurement, by reason of its highly complex or specialized nature, is available from a limited number of suppliers or contractors, or the time and cost required to examine and evaluate a large number of submissions would be disproportionate to the value of the subject of the particular procurement activity. Regulation 9 goes on to state, where a procuring entity engages in limited bidding, it shall include a justification for the reason for selecting this particular method in its record of procurement proceedings. Two-stage bidding is another procurement method. And a key feature of this procurement method is that the submission of proposal takes place in 2 stages, and that bidders can assist in defining the technical requirements of the scope of works. So Regulation 6 of the Procurement Methods Regulation states that the bidding document shall request a supplier or contractor to present an initial tender containing his proposal, and this must be done without the tender price being stated. The firms are then evaluated under the two-stage bidding process and scored, and qualifying firms are the only firms that are invited for the second stage of this procurement method. And the second stage is where the public body invites all suppliers and contractors whose initial tender was not rejected during the first stage to present a final tender, and at this stage is where they submit their contract price in response to the final set of terms and conditions of the procurement. So within the two-stage bidding procurement method, discussions during the first stage are for the purpose of reaching an agreement on the proposed technical solution by the public body. And this procurement method is really used where the request proposals from firms where the technical requirements are very difficult for the public body to define and are highly specialized and complex requirements. So we go into framework agreements. So framework agreements are basically agreements between one or more procuring entities and one or more suppliers or contractors, which establishes the terms and the price, and where appropriate, the quantity under which a supplier contractor will enter into one or more contracts with the particular procuring entity or entities. And there's also a specified period for which the framework agreement or the framework arrangement applies. So the framework agreement procedure. So there's a stage where there's a selection of suppliers or contractors to be a party to that particular framework agreement with the particular procuring entity. And Regulation 18 specifies that the invitation of a supplier contractor to be a party to the framework agreement can be done utilizing either an open bidding method or a limited bidding method. After the evaluation of the bids and the necessary suppliers or contractors identified and the framework agreement is established, the public body then can now call down the required goods, works, or services from a supplier contractor within the framework agreement based on the terms or conditions that govern that particular framework agreement. So a framework agreement, basically, it offers economies of scale through the aggregation of covering sometimes hundreds of items with prices and the terms and conditions agreed. So they're used when the need for the good, work, or service is expected to arise on an indefinite or repeated basis during a given period of time. And some examples would be, for instance, drinking water for public bodies, stationary janitorial services. Or framework agreements are used where the need for the good, work, or service may arise on an urgent basis during a given period of time. And some examples of this would be during the occurrence of natural disasters, example, flooding, hurricanes, and earthquakes. So we go on to discuss some RFP-based procurement methods. The first one we will discuss is the request for proposals without negotiation. So this procurement method is a two-envelope procurement method that can be used for either goods, works, or services. It is used when suppliers or contractors are expected to propose a specific solution, and they usually do this via a methodology or work plan to fulfilling a specific requirement from a public body. So the bidders are required to submit their technical and their financial proposals in two separate envelopes. The technical proposal is evaluated first, and it is ranked according to pre-established evaluation criteria. Only those firms that pass the technical proposal will have their financial proposals opened and evaluated. So the selection of the successful proposal is based on, and we refer to it as the MEET principle, the most economically advantageous tender, which takes into account technical, quality, and sustainability characteristics, and not solely price. So the request for proposals with dialogue, it's sometimes referred to as the best and final offer, or BAFO as we call it. So this procurement method, it includes a phase during which shortlisted proponents engage in private concurrent dialogue with evaluation committee members prior to submitting a final offer. And what this allows, it allows for the parties to establish a more thorough understanding of the contract requirements and to also explore a range of alternative proposed methods to the project performance. So this method is appropriate where it is not feasible to formulate a detailed description of goods, works, or services, and thus dialogue with suppliers or contractors are required to obtain the most satisfactory solution to the particular public body's procurement need, or a contract is sought for the purpose of research, experiment, or development, or lastly, where open bidding was engaged in by the public body, but either no bids were submitted or the procurement was cancelled, and the determination was made that engaging in a new open bidding process or even a limited bidding method would be unlikely to result in a procurement contract. And those are the circumstances under which a public body may decide to use the RFP with dialogue. So we go on to the RFP with consecutive negotiations, and is also referred to as the rank and run. So this method is a 2-envelope system as well, but consecutive negotiations with responsive bidders are required in order to ensure that the commercial terms and conditions, so we see where the RFP with dialogue, you deal with the technical terms. The RFP with consecutive negotiations, you're having these negotiations to ensure that the commercial terms and conditions of the procurement are acceptable to the public body. Consideration of the commercial proposals and consecutive negotiations with the top ranked proponents are only done after the evaluation of the technical proposal. So consecutive negotiations, the RFP allows the public body to run down the rankings basically to negotiate with the next ranked proponent if the negotiations with the top ranked proponent is unsuccessful. So we will discuss some other methods. So requests for quotations, as we call it, RFQs. So RFQ is used for very small value procurement of readily available off-the-shelf goods, small value construction works, or small value services procurement. So regulation 1811, my apologies, mandates that a procuring entity must request quotes from a minimum of 3 suppliers and contractors, and that each invited supplier contractor must be given adequate time, and it gives a time frame of no less than 5 working days to prepare and submit their quotations. So these RFQ documents are not complex. They're very, very simple, and this method is considered non-competitive because the public body determines which suppliers or contractors they actually request quotations from. So for this particular procurement method, the quotations are received first, and they're evaluated to determine compliance with the technical and administrative requirements. Only after the public body determines that the technical and administrative compliance has been reached by particular suppliers or contractors, a price comparison is made between the compliant bids, and the lowest price under this procurement method is then accepted. For single source procurements, and this is another non-competitive procurement method whereby a public body engages one supplier and contractor, although other suppliers and contractors exist in the market and are available for providing that particular need. So Regulation 12 provides that single source may be appropriate where the procurement represents a natural continuation of a previous competitive procurement, and there will be no competitive advantage gained by the public body engaging in a subsequent competitive process. Or the subject matter of the procurement is for a spare or replacement part for equipment that's already in use by the public body, or the subject of the procurement is a good which is similar to a good in use by the public body, and this particular procurement method, single source, will be more cost efficient. Or the subject of the procurement is to be provided by a supplier contractor who is in possession of relevant information and data pertaining to the public body and that particular procurement. Or the public body requires another public body to supply the particular goods, works, or services, or finally, in cases of an emergency. So that's the basis under which Regulation 12 outlines public bodies can utilize the single source procurement. So we go on to the sole source procurement method. And this procurement method is employed where only one supplier contractor is capable of providing the particular goods, works, or services due to either specific expertise, technical or artistic reasons, or reasons connected with the protection of exclusive rights. Regulation 14 outlines that sole source can be utilized where, due to extreme urgency brought about by unforeseen events not attributed to the actions of the public body, the subject matter of the procurement cannot be obtained in a timely manner if open or limited bidding method is utilized. So Regulation 14 gives an additional way in which a sole source procurement can be utilized. So we discussed some factors to consider when selecting a particular procurement method. So firstly, the organization or the company's mandate and your business needs, the characteristics of the items you wish to procure, the current market situation, the degree to which a procurement is urgent, the appropriate level of technology required to carry out that particular procurement activity, the procurement method or technique that would be most suitable. And we discussed, for instance, for simple low-value items that are easily obtainable, you would choose to use your RFQs. For more specialized or complex procurement, you may look to the RFP, the ITB, the ITT. Or the capacity, either the professional judgment, the experience, and the skill of the procurement officer to select and successfully operate complex procuring methods while simultaneously ensuring that abuse and corruption are not introduced into the processes. And we discussed some more complex procurement methods, such as a two-stage bidding and your RFQ with dialogue or negotiations. Now, Regulation 4 also states that the Office of Procurement Regulation may, via guidelines, establish different thresholds to be used for different procurement methods. Now, what is important is that threshold values triggers an appropriate procurement method. So once thresholds are established by the OPR, it will be a major factor that determines what procurement method will be utilized for procurement activity. So we will proceed to the evaluation and approval process. So you have selected your procurement method, you're moving on to the next step. So the procurement department is expected to lead the process of evaluating competitive offers and selecting the supplier for any particular contract. The methods used for selection are some of the most important elements of the named procurement officer's skill set. So the evaluation process. Now, before selecting an offer, every public body must employ an evaluation process to ensure adequate consideration that all aspects of its needs are being optimized. So evaluating a supplier's offer means not only evaluating its bid or proposal from a cost perspective, but they must also evaluate the supplier's ability to perform to the required level of quality and speed. The need for the evaluation process is twofold. Firstly, it offers all potential bidders a fair and equitable method for having their proposals reviewed and considered as a potential solution, because we know core suppliers and contractors input a lot of money when developing their bids and proposals to submit to public bodies. And secondly, it provides the evaluation committee with a clear and concise method for identifying the competent tenders, and ultimately the best overall bid to meet their needs. So as it pertains to establishing the framework for the evaluation process, firstly, the successful outcome to an evaluation begins during the planning stages of the procurement process. And this typically happens during the planning of the annual procurement plan. The evaluation process, however, begins with the drafting of the solicitation documents. So when developing your solicitation documents, the requirements of the goods, works, or services to be procured must be carefully considered to allow the procuring entity to determine what elements must be evaluated when a bid is submitted in order to achieve the project outcome. So the evaluation regulations of 2021 legally requires public bodies to define the evaluation process in its bidding documents, and the major categories on which the bid or the proposal will be evaluated, as well as the weighting assigned to each category, should also be identified. So public bodies are required to have that explicitly stated in the solicitation document, which would allow you as a service provider, if you see a tender, to know, you buy the bidding documents, you know, okay, what elements am I going to be evaluated on, and the weighting for each criteria. So we'll briefly take you through the evaluation process. So the evaluation process consists of the following steps. So establishing the evaluation criteria. So the evaluation criteria basically are the standards and measures that are used to determine how satisfactorily a proposal has addressed the requirements that have been identified in the solicitation documents. Once the basic evaluation criteria is identified by the public body then, they must decide which criteria will either be mandatory or which will be weighted. And mandatory criteria is very straightforward. So it's a pass, fail, yes or no, responsive, non-responsive, compliant, non-compliant criteria. The weighted criteria, however, are criteria which is measured in terms of the degree of responsiveness from the supplier contractor in its bid. There's also the weighted criteria with mandatory elements that you may see employed by some public bodies. And these are basically criteria that have a mandatory minimum requirement that is defined and is measured above that of the minimum criteria. So an example you might see in a solicitation document or bidding document is that a bidder must achieve a minimum score of 50% in each criteria and an overall score of 70% to progress to the evaluation of its commercial bid. And this is what we call the weighted criteria with mandatory elements. Secondly, placing the criteria in the proposal document. So the evaluation criteria must be completed prior to the solicitation of the bids. The evaluation criteria cannot be altered after the opening of bids, and it must be applied equally and uniformly by public bodies in its evaluation of your proposals. Selecting the evaluation committee. So the composition and mandate of the evaluation committee is critical. It is extremely critical to an effective procurement process. The committee comprises of, on average, 3 to 6 persons, and that's depending on the size of the public body as well as the complexity of the procurement activity. It's recommended that the evaluation team should comprise of someone, of course, from the procurement unit, a subject matter expert, which usually comes from the user department, a legal member, as well as a finance member. Members of the evaluation team, they must have the knowledge of the Act, of course, the regulations, and the public bodies handbooks and guidelines. They must have knowledge of the procurement process. They must have commercial acumen, as well as technical and in-house knowledge. So we go on to evaluating the proposal using the criteria. The evaluation process begins after opening of the bid with the preliminary examination, which determines whether your proposals comply with the statutory compliance and mandatory terms and conditions we previously discussed. Substantially responsive bids then advance after the preliminary examination to the technical evaluation. And then thereafter, once they are compliant with the technical evaluation, to the evaluation of its financial proposal. So the committee assesses the compliant bid against the evaluation criteria to determine which is the best bid. Once this is completed, you go on to the preparation of the evaluation report and the award for contract. So the evaluation report is prepared typically by the chairperson of the evaluation team in conjunction with the procurement unit and the user department being the person with the subject matter expertise. The evaluation report must include the full details of the basis upon which the public body came to the determination of the successful proponent. All members of the evaluation committee, once they agree with the evaluation report, are required to sign the evaluation report. And the evaluation report becomes a part of your procurement proceedings, which we will discuss a little later. So just to quickly run through again, so you're establishing your evaluation criteria, and this is codified in Regulation 3. A procuring entity shall select a successful submission based on evaluation criteria and methodology specified in its bidding documents. 3.2 goes on to state a procuring entity's evaluation criteria and methodology shall be appropriate to the type, nature, market conditions, and complexity of the goods, works, or services being procured by that particular public body. So establishing the evaluation criteria. Regulation 4 relates to price factors, which can be used solely or together with non-price factors, and their function is basically to determine which bidder provides the most advantageous bid. So some price factors will include payment terms, extended warranties, life cycle operating costs, after sales services were required, supply of spare parts, and timelines for completion or delivery. Regulation 5.2 states that non-price factor is basically a factor which is not non-monetarily quantified and is assessed using a scoring or weighting system. So non-price factors include, but they're not limited to, the quality of methodology and the work plan that you submit in your bid, the performance, capacity, or functionality feature of the particular good, work, or service, or the sustainability features that you would include in the bid. A non-price factor shall be prioritized, assigned merit points, and awaited according to its relative importance in meeting the desired outcome of the procurement. So placing the criteria in the solicitation document. So basically the solicitation document must define the evaluation process in summary form. It must specify the categories on which your bid or proposal will be evaluated, and the weight assigned to each factor should also be identified within the solicitation document. It must also explain the criteria that can or will result in the rejection of an offer, affirm that the evaluation will include the price, and state the relative importance of each major selection evaluation criteria that it outlines in the solicitation document, as well as specify the evaluation criteria, sub-criteria, scoring systems, and methodology to assist in guiding you as the bidder in the preparation of your bid or proposal. And as discussed previously, the evaluation committee, it typically comprises of 3 to 6 persons, and they must possess experience in the areas of the technical knowledge of the subject matter, the applicable law, the procurement process, commercial acumen, as well as in-house technology to ensure compatibility of whatever good that you are procuring. So evaluating the proposals using the criteria. So we discussed your evaluation process starts right after the opening of the bid. via the preliminary examination. So some of the things the evaluation committee must consider in the preliminary examination would be verification, eligibility of the particular supplier contractor that's providing the bid security, ensuring that if a bid security is required in the solicitation document, that the supplier contractor has the necessary bid security, that the bid is complete, and that the bid is substantially responsive. Now we'll go on to discuss briefly seeking clarification during the evaluation process. So often when evaluating a bid, an answer may be unclear, or an evaluator may feel that they need further information to enable them to evaluate the response properly. In this situation, the public body must ensure that it is fair and it treats all bidders equally in the way it seeks to clarify these matters. So a public body during the evaluation of submissions may seek clarification in writing from any bidder to facilitate the evaluation of that particular bid. The public body shall neither ask nor permit any bidder to change the price of their bid or any other aspect when provided the requested clarification. So once clarification is sought, a bidder cannot change its price in giving that clarification or change any element of its bid. It's basically to answer the question that is posed to you by the public body to clarify that particular issue. And a public body must reject any bidder and forfeit its bid security if the bidder amends its bid in any manner. And that is to ensure that the principles of fairness and equity are complied with. So for the technical evaluation, in the technical or qualification evaluation, members of the evaluation committee evaluate and rank the technical proposals in accordance with the pre-established criteria, which is specified in your solicitation documents. The scoring can be done either using a consensus, so that's where all members of the evaluation team say, okay, yes, we agree that this particular part of the bid will get 8 out of 10, or independent scoring, where evaluation members may not necessarily all agree, they give their own scoring and the mean average is then taken. Technical qualifications proposals that fail to meet the relevant minimum requirements specified in the bidding documents shall be considered non-responsive, and a public body must reject these. So during the technical evaluation, the committee essentially evaluates the bidder's experience, delivery schedules, compliance with the quantity specified, the work schedule identified, after sales services identified, warranty and other requirements that are specified in the solicitation documents. And all this takes place during the technical evaluation of the bid. The commercial evaluation of the bid. So only the technical proposal that meets or exceeds the minimum technical requirements stated in the solicitation documents shall go forward to be assessed for the commercial or the price evaluation. In the commercial price evaluation, the price is first examined for any computational errors. If any bids are received in more than one currency, they are converted to a single currency. The commercial proposals are analyzed, verified, compared and ranked using the weights assigned, beginning with the lowest responsive evaluated bid. And during the commercial evaluation, the evaluation committee must also ascertain that the bid price is not unreasonably high or unreasonably low, but is fair enough for the supplier contractors to successfully perform the intended contract. And preparation of the evaluation report. So a typical evaluation report will include the introduction, the background to the procurement activity, the evaluation of the bids and how the evaluation team went about evaluating the bids, specifying each score a member would give. If it's consensus scoring, you would give those scorings as well. And finally, with the recommendation for the award of contract to who is determined as the successful bidder. The evaluation report is then signed by the members of the evaluation committee, and approval by the designated approver. So after the evaluation report is completed by the evaluation committee, it's submitted to the new procurement officer, who once agrees, depending on the value, it passes through PDAC and then is signed off by the accounting officer. And then the award of contract. So as Mr. Lalchan indicated, we now have the introduction of the standstill period. And the standstill period pursuant to section 35(2) is a dispatch notice during which a procuring entity cannot accept the successful submission, and suppliers or contractors, you can challenge a decision so notified. So once a determination is made as to who is the successful bidder, a public body is required to write to all suppliers or contractors that would have participated in that particular procurement activity, letting you know who is the successful bidder, and they can even proper reasons as to why your bid may not have been successful. You're also notified in that correspondence of the time period the public body would have taken for the standstill period. And you have the opportunity to challenge that decision if you feel so fit. Notification of award of contract upon fulfillment of requirements of the standstill period, once one is applicable, the notification of award will be made to the successful bidder. So the procuring entity shall set a standstill period, and the period is not less than 10 working days, but no more than 15 working days. So we go on to the procurement of consultants. So Regulation 9 of the Procurement of Consultants Regulation of 2021 specifies that the range of evaluation methods that are available for use by public bodies when procuring consulting services, and it also provides a brief explanation of when each method may be applicable. So we start off with the quality and cost-based selection, which is QCBS. And this applies to a competitive process among shortlisted consultants, taking into account the combined quality of the proposal and the cost of the services in determining the selection of the successful consultant. So cost and quality scores are weighted together to determine the highest total score. And this QCBS is the most common method used when selecting consultants. You then have the quality-based selection, QBS. It's appropriate when assignments are complex or highly specialized, making it difficult to define precise terms of reference, or for assignments that can be carried out in substantially different ways, such that the financial proposal submitted by the suppliers may be difficult to compare. So the public body opens and evaluates the technical proposal. Only the highest ranked technical proposal will progress to the next stage, where the public body will hold negotiations with the respective bidder concerning their commercial proposal. So selection under fixed budget or FBS. And this is a method used when the assignment is simple and can be precisely defined, and where the budget is fixed. So the RFP will indicate the available budget and request the consultant to provide their best technical and financial proposals in separate envelopes, but must be within the budget identified by the public body. So the terms of reference must be well prepared by the public body to make sure that the budget is sufficient for the consultant to perform the expected task. We go on to the least cost selection, or LCS. And this is a method that is appropriate for assignments of a standard or routine nature in which the value of the contract is relatively small. And this method is based on a two-step consecutive evaluation, which means that a contract is granted to the firm with the lowest financial bid among those who pass the technical evaluation. And then we have selection based on consultants' qualifications, or CQS. And it may be used for small assignments where highly specialized expertise is required for the assignment. Recruitment time is critical and the assignment is typically for a short term. Very few consultants are qualified, and the preparation and evaluation of the competitive proposals is not justified. So on the basis of the information received in response to a request for expression of interest, the most experienced firm with the best references in the field of interest is selected, and the selected firm is advised to submit a combined technical and financial proposal. So those would have been some of the evaluation methods for procurement of consultants as outlined in the regulations. And we go on to briefly discuss the record of procurement proceedings. So essentially, the record of procurement proceedings is the file within which a public body keeps all documentation and records of decisions, as well as documents regarding any particular procurement activity. So Regulation 3 of the Record of Proceedings regulations provides that a procuring entity shall maintain an easily accessible and retrievable record for each procurement proceeding, which shall be marked with the record management reference number. And the OPR also recommends that public bodies have a soft version of their record proceedings files. So where appropriate, a record shall contain the original and a copy of the information, document, and communication related to the procurement proceedings. And we will discuss some of what must be included in the proceedings files. So the document indicating approval to execute the various stages of the procurement proceedings must be in the file. The complete bidding document, so the solicitation document that would have been issued, must be contained in the file. A description of the object of the procurement, a list of each participating supplier or contractor, as well as his qualifications, the reason for limiting participation where participation is limited by the public body, any request for clarification and the relevant response received for that request for clarification, the reason for the cancellation of bids, where the bids would have been canceled after the solicitation document would have gone out, a statement of the reason for choice of the particular procurement method identified by the public body, and we extensively went through the various procurement methods, the tender price, a summary of the evaluation of submissions, including the reason for rejecting an abnormally low bid, a decision to conduct a procurement without a standstill period and the reason for that particular decision, a decision to suspend a standstill period where a standstill period would have been identified in the solicitation documents, the signed contract once the award of contract has been made, a decision of the office pursuant to its review and the reasons for the decision, and such other information required by the Office of Procurement Regulation. So in closing, Regulation 7 specifies the requirements of reporting, and it states that a procuring entity shall submit a summary of the report of its procurement activities to the office in accordance with the handbooks and guidelines approved for that particular public body by the OPR. And just for information purposes, Section 37 of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act requires that public bodies submit to the OPR no later than 3 weeks after the end of each quarter a report on all contracts awarded during the immediately preceding quarter. And thank you very much for your attention, and that would be the end of my presentation for today.
Thank you very much, Marissa. And I believe that we wanted to take some questions at this time because there is a flood of questions coming through. So I'll hand over back to the moderator who will take us through some of the questions that have arisen, after which we will invite Joy Joseph Lara, our head of property disposal, to do the final presentation. So we will, for the time being, switch to questions and see how much we can get done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lalchand and Marissa, for that very detailed and comprehensive presentation. Based on the feedback in the chat, we have about 5 questions, maybe 6. And I shall commence that segment now. The first question that we received was, where can the form for mediators the form that mediators can use to fill out, where can that form be found in order to be pre-qualified?
Thanks very much. All pre-qualification for suppliers, contractors, consultants, mediators, and arbitrators will be required to register on our database. So when you go onto the depository, it will guide you through the process for registration, and you will be registering on the database, so that once you register there, you will then be accessible to all public bodies. So we would have displayed the address for that depository, and you just go onto the depository. What we do have is a help desk, so that if you run into any problems at all, you can just give us a call, and we can then walk you through the process if you're having difficulties to access the database.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Lalchand, for the response. I trust that that provides the response and the answer to the particular person who posed that question. Does the OPR guidelines extend to the entire CARICOM region?
We will be, what we would have done is that we have opened up our depository to 3 sets of individuals or organizations. The first would have been, you can register based on regional corporation and the Tobago House of Assembly within Trinidad and Tobago. So that's the first bucket. The second one is CARICOM registered companies. And the third is international. And we would have already rolled out to all 3 of those geographic location of suppliers and contractors. Regional corporations and THA, CARICOM, and international. So that if you are participating in procurement activities within Trinidad and you're from CARICOM, you will be required to follow our handbooks and guidelines for participation, and also being properly pre-qualified on our database. And as I said, we did have those sessions, and if anybody would have missed those sessions and you are CARICOM service provider, you can go on our website and pull down that recording, and you should be able to look at that session on our website.
Okay, and I take it that the website you're referring to is depository.oprtt.org?
No, the depository oprtt.org is where you go to register as a contractor and supplier. But the recordings, we will publish that on the site once we get access, and you will be able to get access to the recording that we would have done for the pre-qualification session. So it's a different link that you'll have to use. I think that we would have sent the link. Did we publish it there? Yeah. oprtt.org is our main website, and from there it will launch you into the recordings.
All right, questions are coming in fast and furious, it would seem. Is the quarterly report to be submitted to the OPR currently required as of now, or only upon full proclamation of the Act?
It is required upon full proclamation, but let me also congratulate some of the public bodies. They have already started to publish that information to us. Of course, we haven't published it to the wider population as yet, but we have been getting those reports on a quarterly basis from some of our public bodies. So I want to personally congratulate those public bodies.
Some other questions here, Mr. Lalchan. One is, what happens if you only receive a maximum of 2 quotes, although you may have sent out RFPs, RFQs to more than 8, 10, 12 suppliers?
That then you evaluate those 2, and it allows for that under the regulations in terms of below the 3 required and so on. So you did your due diligence, you sent it out to 10 persons, and you get 2 valid quotes. In fact, we have a lot of those coming through right now from public bodies, and the advice is you go ahead and evaluate it, make sure you have your proper documentation. What we also encourage public bodies to do is to call the 10 suppliers and contractors and find out why they didn't send in their bids. It may be something in the request for proposal, the timeliness of it, it might have been insufficient time, so that we use it as a lessons learned for future reference. So that's the encouragement that we are giving to the public bodies, but you go ahead and evaluate what you've gotten.
All right. Would registered companies be listed on the depository website?
Absolutely. And once you register, you will be able to be seen by all public bodies. And if you as a member of the public wants to find out all the registered contractors on the database, you can also do that, because the Act specifically says that the depository will be accessible to the public. So what we have done is to create a report that could be run and shared with members of the public to state exactly who have been pre-qualified and in what area, financial limits, specific. Let me also say here that when you get registered, you are being registered now for different services, and those services carry a code. We are using the UNSPSC code, which is over 93,000 codes for all different suppliers that is being registered for. That code is being used by the suppliers and contractors. So you must know what is your UNSPSC code that you want to be registered for. The public bodies are also indicating these are the line of businesses that we will be involved in with the UNSPSC code. So once the supplier and contractor comes on board, put in their code, it automatically gets routed to a public body who has indicated that this is the business that we want to attract suppliers and contractors. Once you have a match, the public body then goes in, pulls up the information, everything is okay, they pre-qualify. If it's not okay, they will indicate to the supplier and contractor, this is where you are deficient. Could you please correct it? If you take 1 day to correct it, it is rerouted back that same day. If it takes 10 days, and once you apply for pre-qualification, it goes back to the public body. And once everything is in order, you get pre-qualified. You don't have to be paying any abnormal sums to get pre-qualified. That is no longer required. Additionally, you don't have to be pre-qualified every 3 years. Once you keep your dated information up to date, and how it is done on the system, if you have, for example, insurance certificate that expires, you have to put in, when you are putting in and uploading your insurance certificate, you have to put in the expiry date. Within 3 months of that expiry date, you get a notification saying that this will expire in 3 months. Within 1 month, you get another notification. And on the day of expiry, you get a final notification. Once you keep those information up to date, you automatically remain pre-qualified on the list of pre-qualified contractors. So this is not going to be done every 3 years when you are beholden to a public body to say that I will pre-qualify A or I would not pre-qualify A.
Okay. If only a few, example 3 or 4 contractors qualify in the pre-qualification list, then would only they be granted contracts?
Well, what we have provided for in the regulation also is that where you have a limited amount of suppliers and contractors, and you want to go out for a public tender, what you do is that you state on your document that you will be doing a parallel run. So you encourage those who have been pre-qualified, and at the same time ask for other contractors in that space to come on to the depository while you prepare your tender document and be pre-qualified at the same time as you are preparing the documents for tenders, so that you could enlarge the pool of potential suppliers. And once you get pre-qualified, then you will be permanently on the database. So there is provision in the regulations to add to the list of pre-qualified contractors where there is a limited amount and you want to expand that. There may be also some areas where you don't have any suppliers and contractors, and this is also provided for in the regulations.
Okay. As a state enterprise company, how soon will the depository be fully ready for use to select various suppliers and contractors for business?
So the database is live, so suppliers and contractors could come in and put in all their information. The pre-qualification is being held back for full proclamation. So once we have full proclamation, then we'll open it up to these public bodies to go in and pre-qualify. What we are doing at the OPR is to run, we are actually pre-qualifying our contractors. So we have opened it up to the OPR alone for the time being to pre-qualify the suppliers and contractors to just see if there are any bugs and so on. But once we have full proclamation, that will be opened up to all public bodies. And thereafter, we will give a 6 months transition whereby you can utilize the existing list by the public bodies. And within 6 months, expect that we will have enough suppliers and contractors. So far, we have had over 1,000 suppliers and contractors already come on and put in their initial information, put in their line of business and so on, and awaiting pre-qualification once we have full proclamation.
Okay. Does the legislation allow for special conditions for SMEs?
You do have, under the pre-qualification list, different thresholds that you could be pre-qualified for. So for example, if you want to play in the space of between 0 and 100,000 contracts, there is a requirement that you don't have to produce audited financial statement or even management accounts. You can just get a bank letter stating that you have the credit facilities and so on. So it's not onerous. If you go in the next level up, where it is between 100,000 and 2 million, all you require is 3 months or 3 years of management accounts signed off by a director or the sole proprietor. And it's just management account, it's not audited. If you go above the 2 million, then you require to have 3 years of audited financial statements to get registered at that level. Of course, if you are providing goods, works, and services at the level of the 2 million and above, you'll have to be registered for things like VAT and so on. And that will be some of the criteria. So it goes up in steps. So the small contractors, you can play in the space up to 100,000. Then it goes up by 100,000 to 2 million. And there's different criteria we use. And then above 2 million, up to 10 million, then 10 million to 25 million, 25 million to 100 million, 100 million and above, and so on. So different threshold calls for different requirements.
All right, I have a two-part question here. The first part of it is, which member of the procurement department is to be a part of the evaluation committee? And can members of that committee seek clarification orally or in writing only?
It is preferred all communication should be in writing for completion of the file. And of course, when you get a request for clarification from one supplier, it is expected that you publish that information to all the participants to make sure everybody's on the same page. So it should be in writing. And more than likely, you should have the named procurement officer designating the person responsible for seeking that clarification, and they should be adequately trained to make sure they document what they are doing properly. And when they issue an addendum and so on, it should be properly filed, because those will be the subject of investigation in case of challenges and so on.
Another interesting question here, Mr. Lalchan, thank you for your response. Would procurement done by the Elections and Boundaries Commission, Integrity Commission, the Police Complaints Authority, the Ombudsman's Office, state-owned financial institutions, such as First Citizens Bank, probably, would those also come under the ambit of the Office of Procurement Regulation?
Yes, 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 yes. If you look at the definition covers every single one of the ones that you would have called there. But it even goes further. Sporting organization like Cricket Board of Control, Football Association, Tennis Association, Golf Association, Basketball, or whoever receive funding from the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago. And we have met with all of them in sessions indicating, in fact, the School Board of Education, we would have met with the Presbyterian Board of Education where we had all the teachers, over 125 of them in one session, indicating because they get funding from the Ministry of Education. So it's wide. And we would have issued NGO requirements and so on. So it's not only state enterprises and commissions and so on, but all persons receiving public funds.
Which leads me to the last two questions that I think we would have time for. And the first one is, are credit unions, or would credit unions be considered public bodies, or only when they are receiving or spending public money? Would they then become subject or part of the purview of the Act?
Only if they receive public funds. But individual contributors to the credit unions and so on, that does not constitute public funds.
Was the OPR involved in any way in the procurement of COVID vaccines or PPE or anything like that? And would they likely to become involved in the event of an event of that nature in future?
That is not our responsibility, but what I can say is that during the pandemic, we would have assisted in terms of some of the advice given to the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Social Development in terms of setting up how they can do online procurement and so on. So those advice were given, but not directly involved. We cannot get directly involved in procurement activities because somewhere along the line, we may be called upon to audit and investigate what would have happened. But we do give advice on best practice as required under Section 13 of the Act.
And last but not least, you mentioned something about NGOs, and there was a question that I have in my possession on that, and it is this. Is an NGO in receipt of a subvention from a ministry, example, social development and family services, considered a public body? And if yes, are there any special considerations offered to such entities?
The answer is yes. By definition, they are utilizing public money and they are an organization that is incorporated or unincorporated using public funds in accordance with the definition. And they will be required to fall under the Act. And that's why I would have mentioned that we would have published a special handbook and guideline to be used by NGOs. Now, a number of the NGOs actually get subvention to pay things like salaries and wages of their personnel. The payment of salary and wages and so on do not fall under the Act. But where they utilize the funds to procure goods, works, and services for the NGOs, those will have to be done in a very transparent and make sure that the relevant information is kept whole.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lalchan. I would like to, invite you now to ask for the next presentation. We've exhausted all the questions that we've received as of now. So perhaps we can have the next presenter take the virtual spotlight.
All right, so I'm going to pass on over to Joy Joseph Lara, who, as I mentioned, is head of property disposal. And Joy is going to take us through the disposal of property at this time. So over to you, Joy.
Thank you, Mr. Lalchan. Good day, everyone. So let's jump right into the disposal of public property. And today we'll go through some highlights from the Act and the regulations that has informed the area. We'd start off with highlights from the Act, which defines disposal of public property as disposal of public property includes the transfer without value, sale, lease, concession, or other alienation of property that is owned by a public body. Public property means real or personal property owned by a public body. Sections 55 and 56 of the Act says that a public body shall establish a disposal committee comprising not less than 3 officers for the purpose of recommending the best method of disposing of unserviceable, obsolete, or surplus stores or equipment. And the public body shall refer all matters relating to the disposal of an unserviceable, obsolete, or surplus stores or equipment to its disposal committee within a reasonable time after the stores or equipment becomes unserviceable, obsolete, or surplus. Section 54, a public body shall comply with such general guidelines in relation to the retention and disposal of stores and equipment of a public body as the office may issue, and such special guidelines in relation to the retention and disposal of stores and equipment of a public body as the office may approve for that public body. In terms of disposal of real property, please note that the Act shall no longer provide for the office to act for, in the name and on behalf of the state, to dispose of real property owned by the government in such manner as the government may consider appropriate and desirable. And as Mr. Lalchan would have said previously, this section 1310 has since been removed. However, for disposal of real property, sections 57A of the Act states that notwithstanding the State Lands Act and any other written law to the contrary, the minister may make regulations in respect of the disposal of state lands, real property owned by the government, real property owned by state-controlled enterprises, and real property owned by a statutory body, responsibility for which is assigned to a minister of government. And regulations made under this section shall be subject to negative resolution of Parliament. So we await the regulations to further inform this area. I'll now go through definitions of some terms to bring perspective as we go through the presentation. So real property refers to land and items that are permanently attached to the land, including trees, buildings, and heavy machinery. And personal property refers to physical property, inclusive of stores, equipment, computers, motor vehicles, etc. So we would be focusing on personal public property in this presentation, and we look at highlights from the regulations that has contributed to informing the disposal process for personal property. So essentially, as seen on the slide, public entities are responsible for disposal, and all disposals are to be brought to the attention of the procurement officer. Disposals are to take place in a safe manner to protect the environment and in accordance with manufacturers' instructions. Public bodies are to ensure that they account and accurately record all net proceeds and expenses from disposal. Further, some methods of disposal which could be adopted include public sale, tendering, public auction, gift, lease, concession, transfer, destruction, trade-ins, recycling, or donations. But specifically for public sale or tender or auction, where the net book value, market value, or residual value is greater than or equal to TT $100,000, advertise or publish in 2 newspapers and on your website, and all other methods you can advertise on your website. Continuing with highlights from regulations. So for public auctions or sales, make sure that you have adequate security arrangements, and for purchases, provide your source of funds declaration and biodata information. Also ensure that you obtain technical or subject matter expert recommendation and notify the Office of Procurement Regulation of your disposal actions 6 weeks upon completion. Let's now turn our attention to disposal to employees and what the regulations inform. So the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee shall cause a notice to be sent to the accounting officer or equivalent in a public body seeking prior approval to dispose to the identified persons, which shall include the following: the details of the items earmarked for disposal, a valuation report where applicable of the items earmarked for disposal, the method to be adopted for disposal, and if by way of direct sale or transfer, the reasons for the proposed disposal to the employee or member, the name of the employee or member, the relationship of the employee or member to the public body, and any other relevant details, including the proposed disposal price. Further, for disposal to employees, a public body shall, within 10 working days of the disposal of personal property, where the net book value, market value, or residual value is in excess of TT $100,000, ensure that you notify the Office of Procurement Regulation of the disposal, indicating details of the items, the disposal price, and the name of the employee or member. Let's now go into the disposal of personal public property process. So the process is summarized through a workflow chart which depicts the disposal process specifically for personal public property, which has been mapped utilizing information from the Act and the regulations. I know it's a bit small here, but we'll have a closer look at the functions depicted in the chart, which includes the role of the named procurement officer, the disposal committee, the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee, and the accounting officer. So let's now zoom into each of these roles or functions for easier viewing and illustration. Firstly, let's look at the named procurement officer, or NPO for short. Their role in the disposal process, as illustrated in the chart, commences from receiving a notification on the items identified for disposal. Such a request is then submitted to the disposal committee to convene a meeting. The NPO will then review and sign the strategy development report from the disposal committee and submit to PDAC, that's the Procurement and Disposal Advisory Committee. The NPO would also receive the notice with a decision from the accounting officer through the PDAC, and so would execute the disposal strategy as approved. Also, the NPO is required to prepare a summary report of the completed disposal exercise, obtaining signatures from PDAC members and the accounting officer, and as well report the disposal action or submit the notice of rejection accordingly to the OPR. The second role from the chart has been mapped for the disposal committee. And here the disposal committee would receive a notification of items for disposal from the NPO. The committee would then proceed to convene a meeting where they would complete the disposal strategy development analysis and report, which includes conducting inspection of the property, an appraisal or valuation of the property, market analysis, requirements, and stakeholder analysis. Once this has been done, the disposal committee members sign the disposal strategy report and submit to the NPO to go through the approval process. But in the end, this committee would also be required to be a part of the execution process for the approved disposal strategy. The third function mapped in the workflow chart is that of the PDAC, who would receive the report with the recommendation on the disposal strategy from the NPO or disposal committee. They would also review the report and provide a recommendation to the accounting officer on the disposal strategy. And in the end, they would receive the written notice from the accounting officer on the decision and submit same to the named procurement officer. And finally, we have the role of the accounting officer or CEO or president. In the disposal process, the accounting officer receives a recommendation from PDAC and makes a decision on the recommendation. If more work is required, the report is returned to PDAC or the named procurement officer. If the accounting officer decides to reject the recommendation, he or she would then seek to consult with the minister on the manner in which the items shall be disposed. And for both rejection or acceptance decisions, the accounting officer is required to issue a written notice on acceptance or rejection of the recommendation within 14 days of receipt of the said recommendation. And this brings me to the end of the disposal process requirements and to the end of our presentation to you today. So I now hand you back over to the moderator. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Joy, for that presentation. we will allow, if there is time, for any more or any additional questions. And hopefully someone from the OPR team, either Mr. Lalchand or Marissa or Joy, can assist in providing some answers to those questions. There is one that I think I'm seeing here, which I would like to share and invite a response. And it is this: what is considered personal public property? And then a few examples have been offered. A laptop, for instance, or a computer device, or what else may qualify?
Laptop, the stores and equipment, for example, if you, in the oil and gas sector, you know, things like pipeline, anything that you use as part of your process, it is referred to as stores and equipment, furniture, appliances. Once it is owned by the public body and procured for use by the public body, those are the personal public property owned by a public body. Now, what we have found out is that a lot of these pieces of equipment and so on are purchased and is not kept in any good form for tracking purposes and inventory management. So now it's required under regulations to make sure that you have proper inventory management system for the maintenance of those stores and equipment as opposed to real property. So is anything that you own by the public body, whether it's on your asset register, your inventory record, or other form, you are going to dispose of it, you have to go through that process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lalchand. Two questions, and I suspect that's all we may have time for. The first one is, was a date given for the proclamation of this legislation? Are we aware of a date?
Well, we have been given several dates so far in the public domain. The latest one is that we require further consultation before a date is given. But suffice it to say that everything that we need to do at the OPR has been completed to facilitate full proclamation.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that, one can presume or surmise or imagine that we should be able to proclaim this legislation in the earliest possible time frame in fiscal 2023, probably.
Well, I'm looking at even before fiscal 2023 and before the end of fiscal 2022, we should be in a position to do it because the Honorable Attorney General did give some commitment that they want to do it in the quickest possible time after they finalize some of the consultation, which we will be very happy to participate in.
All right, last question, and that is, under what process would the OPR be funded?
We are being funded from the consolidated fund. So we, like everybody else, prepare our annual budget, and that is submitted to the Ministry of Finance for consideration in the annual budget. And so far, we have been fully funded for our operation, and we have also provided our accounts on an annual basis, the latest being this year in January when we appeared before the Public Accounts Committee. So all those things are in place. There is a question I'm seeing on the chat in terms of disposal of like the Petrochem refinery and so on. Once the act is fully, that's what came through. Does the Office of the OPR have the capability and methodology in disposing of what was known as Petrochem? We will not be required as required previously under 1310. Remember, that is now removed from under the purview of the office, but we will be in a position under the act to investigate any activities in terms of the disposal of public property once that act is fully proclaimed, and we do have investigators on board. If we don't have the capability within the OPR, as the question suggested, we are authorized under the act also to bring in experts that we require to fulfill the mandate of the OPR.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Lalchand and your team. I will now take the opportunity to give some closing remarks. And they start with thanks to yourself and your team for spending the better part of 2 hours with us, if not 2.5, to take us through in a very detailed and comprehensive way the requirements of the Act, and to refresh, if not educate many of us, to bring to our awareness the requirements of good and appropriate, if not proper, procurement practices. This is not a time for us to look forward in fear or backwards in anger, but around us in awareness. And we thank you for opening our collective, if not individual, awareness to the indicative savings that we can derive of the order of 5.2 billion TT per annum. And you mentioned some of the areas in which those funds could be suitably and appropriately deployed. We learned about the 20 to 25%, according to the EU, that tends to be lost in procurement. We thank you for your 301st public appearance. That is phenomenal and demonstrates serious commitment to this process. We thank you for the 314 public bodies approached with a readiness assessment. And we can only humbly encourage the remaining 200-odd public bodies that are yet to respond favorably to your request. We learned about depository.opr.org, where we can get registered, and of course the website itself, where we can avail ourselves of the additional information for in our individual and of course collective benefit. We want to offer thanks to the Credit Union League as well as TTCSI for making this possible. And at one point in time, we had as many as 191 participants. We are down to just about 157 now. And we want to thank them as well for taking the time out to make this possible, for providing very interesting, searching questions, and of course, to Mr. Lalchan and his team for answering those questions with wisdom, with aplomb, with detail. I wish to thank you very much for the opportunity to have been able to moderate this session. And I can only hope that we will see and can have, maybe not the 302nd public appearance, but another public appearance from your team at another point in time as we roll forward towards a proclamation of this legislation, hopefully before the close of fiscal 2022. I return control to Madam VP TTCSI of the Credit Union League for any closing comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morton, our moderator for today, and thanks to Mr. Lalchan, the team, and everyone else, our hardworking CEO at the TTCSI. At the League, we are happy to have you as our umbrella body, and we are grateful for the partnership today in hosting what we consider to be a very successful webinar, relevant and timely in terms of procurement. On behalf of the president of the TTCSI, the board, and the board of the Cooperative Credit Union League, let me once again say how happy we are to have you today from the procurement office sharing this time with us, to all our participants and all stakeholders who are here with us today. We look forward to the early procurement of this legislation that will give us the level of governance that we are looking for in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you once again to everyone, and I wish you a very safe and a comfortable weekend and week ahead. This brings us to the end of today's webinar.
Thank you very much, and always our pleasure to be participating in these sessions. Have a great day, guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
Have a
Bye,
great day all. Bye, bye everyone.
Bye, everyone. Again, the recording and presentation will be shared on our website. Thanks, Sasha.